energy and air pollution will be one of the top 5 issues for the general election.
We talk about Putin being in control. He's not really. It's the various factions under him, and it suits them to have him at the front.
If you're trying to save for a house deposit and you'd have to save up some crazy amount of money, how on earth are you going to do that if a pint is £7?
There's certain key things that we want from India and there's certain key things that they want from us.
Hello, welcome to Bloomberg UK Politics at the Labour Party conference in Liverpool. I'm Hepker.
And I'm Lizzy Burden.
Well, we're looking out onto the River Mersey. It's a bit grey, but I tell you, the mood, just by looking at the pace of the walkers streaming into the ECL Convention Centre, speedy. Business-like, Lizzy.
Yeah, today is business day at Labour Party conference. Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, has got a big speech coming up at 12 p.m. and I have to say the business presence here is strong. It's much stronger than in previous years under Jeremy Corbyn. You've got Goldman Sachs, for example, having paid to sponsor an event at the conference for the first time, and you can probably expect more endorsements like that in the coming days.
Yeah, absolutely. So we were here to talk about the economics, the significant domestic challenges that the UK faces, but what we actually have is a very significant foreign policy issue and test for the Labour Party. For the government in waiting, as Labour wants to portray itself. Now, speaking at the party's conference, Keir Starmer, Labour leader, has said that Israel has a right to defend itself.
This is an appalling attack on Israel, a terrorist attack, for which there is no justification, and Israel has every right to defend herself. And the perpetrators of this have deliberately pushed back the prospect of peace agreements.
Sir Keir Starmer there speaking to the BBC. Extremely clear division between this leader and his predecessor when it comes to the weekend attack by Hamas on Israel.
Indeed, we heard from the former Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn asked if he condemns the Hamas operation.
I think it's important that we don't go into sort of ritual condemnation. There's got to be a way forward that ends the root cause of the problem, which is the illegal occupation of Palestine.
So a huge difference between those two statements. That was Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour leader from 2015 to 2020.
Joining us now is Luciana Berger, former Labour MP who resigned over Jeremy Corbyn's handling of anti-Semitism in the party and lived through those painful years. Welcome to Bloomberg Radio. You are back here at conference, you've said, for the first time in 5 years. Your reaction to what your party has said after the attack by Hamas?
Well, we've had some very, very robust statements from both Keir Starmer, leader of the Labour Party, and David Lammy, Shadow Foreign Secretary, in response to the barbaric events that we've seen unfold in the last couple of days. The attacks on Israel, the indiscriminate rockets, the slaughter of women, of children, of pensioners in their homes, at their bus stops, the decapitated bodies taken through Gaza, the most horrific scenes that we're not seeing broadcast on our TV channels because they are so extreme. Of the thing last night that I was in tears over was of 6 babies, children around the ages of 12 to 18 months that have been put in cages that are currently hostages in Gaza. Unfathomable scenes, the greatest loss of life of Jewish people since the end of the Holocaust. This is unprecedented, and in the wake of that, the statements we've heard, the unequivocal statements we've heard, I think, from Keir Starmer condemning these brutal attacks and giving, I think, Israel the solidarity that it requires at this time, has been very striking and in stark contrast to what we've experienced a number of years ago under a very different leadership.
Yeah, we didn't expect to be talking about the former leadership at this conference. Of course, the slogan is, let's get Britain's future back. We were expecting to be talking about Keir Starmer's mission, but here we are. I do wonder whether you think the party's done enough to get Jewish voters back on side.
There's been so much that's done, and it's exceeded my expectations. So I rejoined the party in March of this year when the Labour Party was taken out of special measures that had been imposed on it by the Equality and Human Rights Commission, when they investigated the Labour Party and found that under the previous leadership of Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour Party had breached the Equality Act and had been found guilty of the victimisation and harassment of its Jewish members. That was very dark findings, and the party had a big job to do to turn that around. And to Keir Starmer's credit and his leadership, a lot has been done, and enough was done to take the party out of special measures. Now, I'm not complacent, and I don't think that's, tick, all of job has been done, but certainly this conference that I'm at here today in Liverpool in 2023 is incomparable to the conference that I experienced when I was last here 5 years ago in 2018.
So, in a way, this conference, the party is asking us to visualise their top leadership team in government positions. This is an enormous test, at least on the scale of Ukraine and the pandemic. We were just seeing David Lammy dash past, the shadow foreign secretary, very much in demand today. What happens to the Labour Party, let's say were it to be a government in future, but even now, if this war becomes a much bigger conflict in the Middle East? Don't think anyone expected to be asking those questions of the Labour Party now.
No, but we, I think, can reflect on the answers that we've heard and the leadership that we've seen both internally here in the UK and what's being said on the international stage and what the Labour Party have said in response to these actions, to know that this is a very different Labour Party. This is the Labour Party that I joined. This is the Labour Party that I know. This is a Labour Party that is committed to the ideals of internationalism, that believes in equality and believes in equality for all, not just equality for some. So I think we've seen that borne out, and this country needs change, and Keir Starmer has shown that he can turn this party around and create the change within his own party. That's why he should be creating the change for the country. If we talk about what's happening in the region itself, this is far greater than what's happening between Israel and Hamas, which is a terrorist organisation that is currently in charge of Gaza. It goes far wider and greater than that. It's no, I think, surprise or coincidence that these events have taken place when Israel was on the cusp of signing the Abraham Accords to normalise relations with Saudi Arabia. And there are reports coming out, and I don't know if they're verified yet, that Iran played a very strong role in supporting Hamas in advance of the actions that were taken. I read last night, and again, I haven't been able to corroborate, that there was a cyber attack that took place on Israel just in advance of the breach and the attacks and the rockets that were launched and the attacks that took place within Israeli borders. So, I think what we're seeing and what the scenes that we saw from the Iranian parliament and from Iranian parliamentarians chanting in support of the action and the fireworks that they set off in celebration of these barbaric events shows that this goes far greater and wider, and it will be a test, I think, to the international community.
Yeah, so what should Keir Starmer's policy, his strategy be going forward on this when, we were already talking about the West being stretched on Ukraine?
Well, it will be incumbent on current leaders of governments, of which Keir Starmer is not yet Prime Minister of this country. I sincerely hope he's successful at the next general election. It'll be incumbent on all oppositions to show unity and to get behind their country's leaderships if they do show that leadership on the world stage. I think there's going to be a job for the UN. I think there's going to be a job for the G7, the G20, obviously question marks about what to do about Russia at this time as well. Some major challenges, and we've got some very difficult, dark times ahead.
Luciana, you're not an MP at the moment, but could you in some future imagine a cabinet role for yourself, a role in government, or returning to frontline politics?
I haven't ruled out returning to frontline politics. There are, however, many different ways in which people can contribute and make a difference to our national public life. We're obviously having this conversation at this moment. I'm very involved in charity work. I support many of my Labour colleagues from when I was in the House of Commons at the sidelines and in various ways. I haven't ruled out a return to frontline politics. I'm also
you're sounding very positive. You're smiling almost ear to ear.
No. But I'm certainly not a candidate at this next general election. I'm also mum to two pretty small children. I've got my hands full at this time. It's not going to happen at the next general election. But haven't ruled it out for the future.
Well, you've got a front row seat to Rachel Reeves' speech later, so maybe you'll be back on the front bench at some point in the future. Luciana Berger, former Labour MP, thank you for joining us.
So Luciana Berger, former MP there, absolutely striking, her description of what is happening in Israel. Extremely pointed, but Lizzy, she was very firm in her support of the current leadership of the Labour Party. Some 3 years since Jeremy Corbyn presided over a party accused of anti-Semitism that saw protests in Parliament Square, that lost basically almost all of its Jewish MPs who resigned in protest at that leadership. So we do seem to have come really 180 degrees when it comes to Keir Starmer. And I want to mention not just Luciana Berger, but the broader Jewish community within the UK, albeit very concerned about a potential uptick in racist violence or anti-Semitic violence or responses here in the UK to what's going on in the Middle East. You also have to factor in that both the Board of Deputies of British Jews and the Jewish Leadership Council, the biggest organisations in the UK, have thanked both the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer for their support. They have warned about the potential for a rise in anti-Semitic incidents in the UK, but it was striking that Keir Starmer and the current Prime Minister were very similar in their language, in their condemnation of the Hamas attacks, of the brutality in Israel.
Yeah, not just similar to each other, but also the same message as other European leaders. But I think another thing that was interesting about our conversation with Luciana Berger is that we threw it forward to what could happen if this becomes a much bigger war in the Middle East. I also think that we should note that this Labour Party conference is not the one that Keir Starmer was preparing for. The Israel issue is dominating the airwaves in a way that we hadn't expected. But what it underscores, as that conversation with Luciana Berger did, is just how far the party has come from the leadership of Jeremy Corbyn. Jeremy Corbyn, of course, you'll remember, was willing to share platforms with supporters of Hamas and Hezbollah before he became Labour Party leader. Just on Friday, he didn't take the opportunity to condemn the attack. He actually emphasised the impact of Israel's occupation. And so this is kind of, it wasn't what Keir Starmer was expecting to be doing, talking about the past. Yeah. But this has actually, I don't want to say an opportunity, but it's kind of forced the conversation to re-evaluate, to remember just what a different Labour Party this is from previous conferences.
Yeah, absolutely. And also I want to say this, that the issue of anti-Semitism dominated within the Labour Party and the left for many, many years in the UK, but it really didn't go beyond that conversation unless you were a Labour voter or an MP that was suffering from a lot of the online abuse and harassment, as Luciana Berger was. This actually wasn't an issue that went beyond that. This, of course, explodes that entire conversation, onto the forefront of UK politics, I think, in terms of, how the UK now addresses Israel and supports Israel as the UK has done. But you're right. I think that it is a risk that the Labour Party conference, this annual gathering, is overshadowed by the geopolitics, by the global issues. Having said that, and you can hear it from the sound around us, there is frankly a crush of people here at Labour Conference who want to influence not just the foreign policy of the Labour Party, but the domestic policy, of course, too. So Keir Starmer wants to portray the Labour Party as the government in waiting. They won the by-election in Scotland, and yet voters have not warmed to Keir Starmer. Opinion polls still question what Keir Starmer stands for. The party overall, yes, are 20 points ahead of the Conservatives, but there are still actually a lot of questions to be answered. And so will Keir Starmer welcome a sort of foreign policy challenge of this magnitude? Will he be worried that the party is overshadowed on this issue? Will he want to try to talk about, the economic policy? That's the real question.
I definitely think they're going to want to talk about the economic policy today. We're going to hear from the Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves at 12 p.m. She's going to want to burnish her green credentials while assuring the public that she would be fiscally responsible. She wants to use the green policies to grow the economy, but controversially, they're relying on growth to fund public spending. And so you have to ask how ambitious that actually is. And I was speaking to the Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Darren Jones. I asked him, when you've got this big poll lead and you've had it for so long, does that mean that you're going to be complacent? Take a listen.
Well, it's pretty desperate, isn't it, that the Chancellor of the Exchequer, who should be trying to get inflation down, turning around the economy, building our infrastructure projects on time and in budget, is taking the time to interfere with Labour Party announcements. It's pretty desperate from the Conservatives, I think.
Well, the other message from the Chancellor at Tory conference seems to have been that nobody should be under any illusions that they're going to be able to live a life on benefits. Do you agree with that message?
Well, Liz Kendall, our Shadow Work and Pension Secretary today, will be saying in her speech that, of course, everybody that can work should work, and that's about making sure that we create good, well-paid jobs across the economy, which means turning the economy around from the failings of the last 13 years.
But should you be using sharpening benefit incentives to get people back into work?
Well, you need to create the jobs and the job opportunities for people, and quite frankly, the ability for them to be able to get there, and that's about making sure that the economy turns, that we get investment in from the private sector into businesses growing in the UK, and that we build infrastructure on budget and on time.
On that investment point, thinking about Labour's borrow to invest plan, it looks increasingly expensive in the current high yield environment. Are you going to proceed whatever happens to rates?
Well, we're going to be co-investing with the private sector. This is not about 100% public sector borrowing for public sector
it affects everybody.
Project. Of course, but we know, and you'll hear today in Rachel Reeves' speech, that for every £1 of public sector investment, we expect to get up to £3 of private sector investment. Our investment programme is about unlocking private sector investment, building the infrastructure the country needs. It's not about increasing debt for day-to-day spending, which is against our fiscal rules.
OK, just in terms of how you'd raise money, would you hike taxes for hedge funds and private equity?
So we've already announced 3 of the main tax changes that we will put forward at the election. One is on private equity carried interest, which raises hundreds of millions of pounds for our school system. The other is on non-dom status for people that live and work here but don't pay all of their taxes here. And the third is on VAT on private school fees. And that additional revenue that we think we'll get from those taxes will go straight into the health system and the education system.
If it turns out that abolishing the non-dom regime doesn't raise as much money as you expect, are you going to stick to it on ideological grounds?
Well, we're very confident that it will raise the money that we've outlined. If you look at independent assessments of changing the non-dom tax status, they think that that will raise multiple billions of pounds of revenue per year. We've taken a very conservative estimate of around £1.6 billion per year, which we think is very credible.
But if it doesn't raise that money, will you revive it with a different name?
But we don't think that that will be the case, and if it is in a few years' time, you can come back and ask me about it then.
We're about 15 months, we expect, from a general election. You've got such a big poll lead, you've had it for a while. Is there a sense that you needn't announce anything too bold, too radical, in case you rock the boat?
I think our announcements are pretty bold. We're aiming for the highest, most sustained economic growth in the G7. We want to decarbonise the power system by 2030. We have to fix the NHS, which is a huge problem. You'll hear a lot today from Rachel Reeves about building the national infrastructure this country needs. All of those things are pretty bold, big pledges that we are very ambitious for delivering for the country.
So that was Shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Darren Jones. Caroline, you mentioned just how strong the business presence is here. I was at an event last night sponsored by Revolut, and I was speaking to different people from the business community, and I was asking, what's the chicken and what's the egg? Are business voices here because they already think that Labour is aligned with their view, or is it because they think it's somewhat inevitable, given the polling, that Labour is going to be the next government and they want to influence the policy? And that it's the latter that was the answer, repeatedly in conversation after conversation that I had. I know you've been talking to business leaders as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we know that with the boss of Microsoft is here, of Octopus, and of so many others. I've been speaking to the British Chambers of Commerce this morning, also to the Venture Capital Association in the UK. They are all very open to the Labour message. They all want not just stability, but delivery on key points. I mean, let's just remember that the Conservatives have presided over an unprecedented series of disasters. Leaving the EU, for economists, hands down, has been a bad decision for the UK. The pandemic, the cost of living crisis, and then the Tories sort of mired in scandal from Partygate to changing prime ministers 3 times in a year. Let's not forget that.
Well, I've got a bit of PTSD from this time last year. I was sat down interviewing Rachel Reeves as the pound was sinking because this was in the aftermath of the mini budget, and Kwasi Kwarteng had said that there was more in the pipeline. So for Labour, it's a different conference in the sense that the Tories that they are opposing are very different this time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the issue is around policy. So we know that the party has talked about delivering 1.5 million new homes. They want to borrow to invest. They want a wealth fund. They've talked about a COVID fraud commissioner and also cutting NHS waiting lists. I still am wondering whether this is a conference actually of policy, or whether this is a conference that still has time, that the party still has time ahead of the next general election. I'm not entirely sure, but they're certainly rolling out quite a number of policies, and they're being asked for quite a lot of details on those policies now.
Yeah, but the fact that ministers, whenever they're on the airwaves, are having to spend 3 or 4 questions rightly on Israel means that they aren't being probed as deeply on the details of those policies, which is perhaps convenient for Labour, given that we are 15 months or so away from a general election. But detail is what business wants at this point. I also would point out that this borrowing to invest promise is really opening up Labour to the Tory narrative. And you've got to ask, when gilt yields are so high, whether that is going to work, whether they're actually going to get the 1 to 3 return that they want from the private sector. Darren Jones seems confident in the numbers.
Yeah, there's also, I think, a difference of what type of investment. I mean, actually, investment into the UK is going up, and the UK is a top destination for investment when it comes to startup businesses, to tech companies, for foreign FDI, foreign direct investment into the UK. We do rank very, very highly. So I think Labour has a strong case, but it's also about, and the UK has a strong case, but it's also about the distinction between investing in infrastructure, i.e. building the roads and railways and the airports and the freight capacity and so on for trade to take place, and also persuading businesses that they should spend on their own investment. Think about the car manufacturers and the EV and battery plants that the UK needs. I think those are all sort of key challenges. I think there's one factor that we haven't actually gotten to yet. That is the unions. How much sway do the unions have? I think of Sharon Graham, the General Secretary of Unite, the biggest Labour donor. She's accused Keir Starmer of being too timid. She wants a wealth tax. She has raised the issues of renationalising energy. She wants Labour to, in her words, go to bat for workers. I think that is another issue that that this Labour Party are trying to position themselves in the centre ground. They want to be the undisputed party of business. Can you do that and also answer those questions that workers want, i.e. not just a pay rise, but actually often restoration of past pay?
Yeah, if you're the party of business, is that at the expense of being the party of the unions? Is it mutually exclusive? And, the unions not giving the same financial support because Keir Starmer's throwing his weight behind business. It's very difficult to walk that line, and indeed Keir Starmer reluctant to talk about wealth taxes because for fear of losing that massive poll lead that they have at the moment.
Yeah, I think it is an immensely difficult challenge, but I think that the Labour Party frontbench are certainly being put to the test, and I think that the interviews that Keir Starmer did over the weekend were a start, and I wonder also what he is going to say, because his big speech is not right at the end of party conference. It's actually sort of in the middle. Rachel Reeves today, Keir Starmer tomorrow. What do you think is going to be the tone? We had this conversation only last week when it came to the Prime Minister. Last week, remember, the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt's speech was incredibly short. It also pointed to the personal life story of Rishi Sunak, and then we got a much longer speech from Rishi Sunak, which was an hour long, that did have hinted at some of his personal background. Of course, it was introduced by his own wife, and so that was a sort of personal element. I wonder what Sir Keir Starmer's going to have to say.
We shall all take a drink when he tells us that he's the son of a toolmaker.
I wonder whether that will emerge in the speech or not.
Week after week at Prime Minister's Questions, he refers to his class background. He's known for long speeches. Look, I don't think he's going to get lost in the detail because he doesn't want to be pinned down at this point, but I think it's about the tone and it's about the message that Labour will offer stability in contrast to the Conservatives, and talking about the vision, the positive case to vote Labour, because he's spent the past few years arguing why he should lead the Labour Party instead of Jeremy Corbyn, and why people shouldn't be voting for the Conservatives.
Absolutely. Well, of course, we're going to have much more coverage for you. We'll be live here at Party Conference. We're going to listen in to Rachel Reeves. We're going to bring you all of the details. Well, we'll have, of course, much more from the Labour Party conference in the next couple of days. We'll be hearing from a really interesting, important voice, Labour Together. Their director, Josh Simons, will be joining us. They're one of the key think tanks, we believe, behind Labour policy. Also, Bronwyn Maddox, the CEO of Chatham House.
And lots of other front benchers, Caroline.
Absolutely. That's it from us for today. If you like the programme, don't forget to subscribe. Give it 5 stars so that other people can find it on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen.
This episode was produced by James Woolcock, and our audio engineers were Marifal Hussain and Max Green. I'm Lizzy Burden.
And I'm Caroline Hepker. We'll be back with more from the Labour Party conference in Liverpool tomorrow. This is Bloomberg.
Bloomberg UK Politics. Listen weekdays at noon on DAB Digital Radio in London.